Michelle, thank you so much for joining today's session on the power of hypnosis. It's so good to have you because today we have a really interesting case study for which we have permission to discuss, of course, and it's about relieving pain. I on purpose don't say pain management because this particular client of yours actually was relieved of her pain to a large degree. And before we jump right into it, I just want to remind everybody this is non-medical hypnotherapists. We do not diagnose, we do not prescribe, and we do not treat our clients. So what we do is we facilitate a space for the client in the natural state of hypnosis where they can find out all these things for themselves and have an opportunity to just heal themselves like that. So your client wasn't a youngster, I see.
Right. She was 72. And it's interesting, it's good that you say that about non-medical hypnosis, because she had been to see her GP 2 weeks before she came to see me. So she was given the all clear. Basically, there was no underlying sort of medical cause for her back pain. And she'd just been prescribed anti-inflammatories, which she wasn't keen on taking because they kind of had a negative or a sort of upsetting effect on her stomach. So she wanted to find another way to deal with the pain.
Okay, and you had more than one session with her. I was reading up on. Tell us about it.
Yes, so this was the third session with this client, but it was her first session had been for pain in her legs, which I'd successfully treated. She helped her successfully manage. She'd said to me after that session that she was able to climb the stairs for the first time in a long time in her apartment building. And then the second session was about fear and anxiety, which it was a very successful session. So this third session, she really wanted to manage this new back pain that she was experiencing. She hadn't really experienced it much before. It had started 2 weeks prior to her coming to see me for this session. And the reason she wanted to address it was because she was going on a long overseas stay with her family. She was going to visit a family in Europe. She was going to be away for 2 months, so she didn't want to have this back pain hanging around. And what happened was when she came to see me, she said she'd noted that the pain had started 2 weeks prior to our appointment, and that she felt that it was because she was doing too much for other people. So she didn't feel that she could say no, and she felt that this was impacting on her preparations for her own trip. People were asking her, it was neighbors asking her to water plants because they were away, and someone wanted her to go to the traffic department to fetch a driver's license for them. And she had to go and stand in queues and do sorts of things for other people. And she's a very helpful, generous person, but this was just, she felt that it was too much for her at that particular time, and she wasn't able to say no. And this was now, she'd associated this with this pain in her lower back.
Okay, how did she make that association? Because that it requires quite an awareness of a person to link a symptom of the body with a mental or an emotional state.
Yes, I think she is a very aware person, a very self-aware person, and I think she'd noticed that this kind of anger and resentment was building up in her 2 weeks prior to our appointment, which was also when the pain had started. So that's when she'd been to see her doctor. So she made the association from a time point of view that the pain had started at about the same time as she started feeling this kind of anger that she wasn't able to say no, and she kept saying yes, but she felt that there was definitely a link there for her. So it was very perceptive of her.
That's absolutely, and I think this is a topic that perhaps at large the public is maybe unaware of. I mean, it's one of the centers of our teachings and what we learn, that our emotional state isn't separated from our body. So our emotional state and our mental state, like rumifications or repetitive kind of thoughts of a kind that are not very kind to us, sooner or later, there is a good chance that they will manifest in the body. So you say for her that she built up anger and resentment. well, against whom? Against herself, I would assume, for being kind of too helpful for people.
And just that feeling of not saying no, wanting to say no, but not going ahead and not following through and saying that actually it's not good for me to be taking on all these kind of extra responsibilities when actually I'm running out of time to do what I need to do for myself. And I'm 72 years old, so there's a reality there as well. So yes, I think you're quite right there, is that she wasn't able to express it, and so it was internalized.
Yeah. And maybe you have a bit more insight into her background, but usually I find, and that generally, it's a generalization, of course, but then maybe it's possibly more linked to a trauma, that when somebody has a traumatic experience or perceived traumatic experience, it can take quite some time for the body to kind of produce a symptom. 18 months, 2 years, even longer. So in this case, I wonder what your personal opinion is as to why that was relatively quick. You said she didn't had the pain in the back before, now putting all this pressure prior to her trip, and the symptom developed so quickly.
I think she'd experienced an emotional trauma 18 months before, when her elderly mom had passed away. Her mom was in her 90s, and she'd also been very much involved with her mom, because she was very frail and not well, and doing a lot for her mom as well. So I think that there definitely historically there were other things going on, but this particularly, it became quite acute at this particular point for her. So and I think that there was the kind of she hadn't traveled for a long time because of obviously COVID and pandemics and all sorts of things, and there was some sort of anxiety there as well about running out of time and leaving her own home unoccupied for two months while being away. So I think it all just became a little bit too, it all kind of came together and became a little bit too much.
Yeah, and she made that deduction herself, that this is because of her resentment and anger towards herself, that she can't say no. This is very advanced.
Yes.
I don't think that is kind of the rule of thumb for our general kind of clients that we'll see, that they make the connection in something like that. Normally we have to go into the techniques that we do with our clients to find out the connections that there are. Even though with our experience, sometimes we have assumptions, but then of course we can't work on those,
No.
But yeah, and then you facilitated in this last session that we are particularly interested about the back pain, you facilitated a technique that, as far as I know, the South African Institute of Hypnotism is the only place where you can learn this form of parts therapy. And without going into the techniques, but it is such an interesting kind of interaction between different aspects of the client. And from what I was reading, she was totally confirmed when an aspect of her came to the forefront, and confirming what she suspected it to be. Give us a little more details on that if you want.
So what I did was I said to her that there's a part of her that's responsible for giving her pain, and it was doing a good job. And I wanted to speak to the part of my client that was causing her this pain, to find out what it had to say, because there was obviously a good reason for it. And this part came forward. It gave itself a name. It was called PS. And I asked PS, what job does it do for my client? And it said, I make her aware of her emotions. So this was the part that was causing the pain, was making her aware of her emotions. So it was exactly what she told me in the pre-talk before she'd gone into trance, which was absolutely fascinating. And yeah, it was incredible. And then I asked her, why is it important that you do this? And she said, this part said, because she does too much, she must stop. She must say no if she doesn't want to do something. So that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, confirming again what her perception had told her when she'd communicated this to me before she'd gone into trance. So I then thanked this part for coming forward because it shared this very important information, and then I asked it if it would be willing to just wait while I called forth another part, because there was going to be another part of my client that had something else to say. So I called forth this part. I asked to speak to a part of my client that desired the change. So this was the part that brought it to me, that motivated for her to come and see me to try alleviate this pain. And that this part I wanted to speak to was interested in her happiness and her well-being. And this part came forward and it called itself peace. So I asked, what job do you do? And she said, I keep the peace. I don't like conflict and I don't like to let people down, which was also very powerful. So then what followed was a negotiation between these two different parts to find out what did each part want, and what would they be willing to do differently in order to work in my client's best interests. And it turned out that they were they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted my client's happiness and well-being. They agreed to work together, which was, it was really great to facilitate that, because they were just, they were like her best friends who just, wanted to, like, they hadn't necessarily been aware of each other before. And they realized they actually wanted the same thing. So then we had a little chat and a negotiation, and they agreed to work together. And it was really quite a rewarding experience for me as a facilitator.
Yeah, I just want to say something, because viewers of this video, or if it is a podcast, the listeners, I think we must just explain a little bit that when we do parts therapy, it's not like we have multiple personalities or something like that. In fact, there are schools of thoughts that we have any given time have many different kind of parts that can come to the forefront when called for. And when I teach the technique, I often give an example that you as a facilitator of a session brings forward a very different personality, as if you go and play with your dog, or another one when you go out party, or when you ask your bank manager for a loan, in different life circumstances for different purposes, let me call it like that. It seems as different personality traits, very strong, but they seem to be little cocooned entities that are ready to help us with whatever life wants us to do now. But the thing that is so amazing, which obviously I was also unaware of before 2011 when I learned this technique, is that they actually kind of live in isolation. So there is no communication amongst them. So you pointed that out so beautifully. So there is that part that says, hold on, lady, you need to be in charge, in touch with your emotions. Right? You cannot keep on saying yes, 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 and load more things. So for me to give you a warning or an alarm signal, I'm going to give you some back pain. And the other part says, no, I want peace with the people around me, and for all sorts of reasons we not have to go into, because it's different for everybody. For her, it was she didn't want conflict, she wanted peace. And now, for the first time, there's a communication between those two aspects of that same lady. And they negotiated. And what happened what kind of agreement did they come to?
Well, the second part that had come forward, the one that was keeping the peace, said that it would start saying no, in the interest of my clients. It would start saying no when it felt like it was doing too much. And the first part said, as long as you do that, I'm not going to cause you pain. So they came together, they reached agreement very quickly. I think they both agreed that this would help my client have more energy, and that she would have a greater sense of well-being. And they were like, they were just there for her. So it was great. It was actually quite a quick session, in that there was no disagreement between them. They realized that they wanted the same thing, and it was very effective.
Which is often the case, huh? And yet when you're not familiar with the technique, and I mean, I have read hundreds of case studies, facilitated possibly hundreds of those sessions. For us, this is kind of normal. But when a newcomer hears this for the first time, it almost sounds miraculous, doesn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my client said to me afterwards, this was her second parts therapy session with me. The first one had been for fear and anxiety. And she said this time and the previous time that she was absolutely, utterly intrigued by how she felt these parts that she hadn't been aware of just coming up and just saying what they said. And she found it such an intellectually interesting exercise afterwards that she was like, she was absolutely fascinated by it as well, and she felt this kind of immense peace. Afterwards, she said to me, "I just feel incredibly peaceful, and I really feel wonderful because I feel like we've resolved something here today." So,
Yes.
But she found the whole process quite fascinating for herself.
It is fascinating. Let's face it, it is fascinating, and the beauty of this is that this is now in the consciousness of the client. So they're not dipping away again into the unconscious, let's call it that, or into the subconscious. They can. I have it in my own body with sciatica, which also had an emotional underlying reason. And so now, after this has been resolved, whenever I feel my sciatica now, I just know I need to watch out. Here's my little alarm bell, like a warning sign on the dashboard. I need to watch out of something. And this is just so amazing how the symptoms of the body can be understood so much better. But there was some more little thing to the session that came up just before you concluded it.
Yes. So what happened was, once the two parts had reached their agreement to work together, I then asked my client if there was another part of her that had anything to say that perhaps hadn't yet, contributed to the session. And there was another part that came forward called trust. And trust wanted to just make its presence known and to say that it was very important for trust to be a part of this agreement. And I then went back to the other parts and I said, so have you heard what trust has said? And they said, yes, they trust each other. They both agreed that they trusted each other to honor the agreement that they'd reached to work in my client's business.
Yeah.
So it was a third one that came up, and it was just to basically strengthen the whole process, which was beautiful. And fortunately, I mean, the two parts trusted each other. They agreed that they trusted each other. So yes.
And that's why it was quick, because this is not always the case. We have cases where some of the parts really don't see eye to eye, right? And now also the way you make it sound super simple. And yes, this wasn't a complicated session, partially because of the awareness of your client, I think. But it is a complex technique that needs to be followed through in a particular way. Otherwise, when you bring these aspects into the consciousness of the client and it's not done correctly, it could possibly lead to some confusion within the client, and obviously that mustn't happen. So now you had trust kind of gluing this agreement together, which is really beautiful, isn't it, just? And now, most interesting for us is, although you gave it away a little at the beginning, so what was the outcome for her?
Well, the outcome was that she said to me straight after the session that she felt that much lighter. She felt that she'd been to another place and that her back pain was gone. So that was really amazing to hear. We had agreed that before she went into trance, we'd agreed that she would, during the course of the next week, she would let me know how she felt. And she let me know a week after she'd gone. She'd been through Dubai airport, she'd flown to Europe, she'd been on a 4-hour train journey to where she was going in Spain. And she then let me know that the back pain had not returned. So to me, if you're going to travel that whole way and you're not going to experience back pain, and that's a pretty good sign that the session had helped. So yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope that gives lots of people hope, and not to jump to the conclusion that all symptoms of the body are based in emotions, and it doesn't replace proper medical, how do you say, investigation and treatment, perhaps, which is out of our league. So we don't really know about that. But as a complementary addition to your medical investigation, if the client, if you as a listener suspect that there could be, or you just want to go a little bit deeper into the symptom, I think this is a wonderful, wonderful way to work with it. And it's not limited to symptoms of the body. We say that parts therapy is inner conflict resolution. So wherever we feel a conflict, that can be like, I want to diet, but I can't, or I want to start a habit and I can't. You know, when we have these, when we say, you have got this voice on the shoulder and this voice on the shoulder, you know, I'm on purpose not making them negative and positive, because they usually aren't. Like in the case of your client, they both wanted something positive for the client. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Michelle, do you have some closing words for the listeners?
I just want to say that the more sessions I facilitate, the more I'm discovering, and the more, you know, it's absolutely amazing the power that we have within ourselves to heal ourselves. And it's really quite a privilege for me to be a facilitator and to be able to work with people and to help them. It's great. So yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing it. And thank you for your client, unbeknown to me, for giving permission to share her story. Please convey that to her. Thank you, thank you, thank you.